So we all know that we should be learning the notes on the fretboard, right? But the thing is, it's a lot of work and it's actually kind of boring. So today I'm going to offer some advice for simplifying the process and maybe even making it just a little bit more fun. That way you can reap all the benefits with minimal frustration. Why? You know why, because you're a guitar player and this is GuitarAmado. Well, hello again to all my fantastic guitar playing friends out there. Welcome back to the wonderful world of GuitarAmado, where there is no right or wrong way to play, there's just your way. And in case you're new to the channel, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Adam Amado, and I'm here to help retrain the way you think about playing the guitar. That way you can have more fun and get better faster. All right, so now that those introductions are out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into today's lesson. So I've just got some quick tips and tricks for those of you out there who are interested in learning the notes of the fretboard, but you might be just a little intimidated by the process. I mean, look at all those frets and strings, and like, how do you possibly memorize all of the notes on the fretboard? You got to minimize your workload and identify the quickest wins. And this is very much based on the 80-20 principle. Now, in case you aren't familiar with the 80-20 principle, the short version is, with most things in life, especially with something like guitar playing, 80% of the results that you're looking for come from only 20% of the effort. And the trick is to identify that 20%. What's the smallest amount of work that's going to move the needle the most and provide the biggest win? And that is what we're after today when it comes to learning the notes on your fretboard, because that's way too big of a subject to tackle in just one simple YouTube video. And I want to avoid that information overload and just give you some quick wins to help you along that journey, or at least get you started off on the right foot. So a lot of the traditional methods for learning the notes on the fretboard will just have you go by position. So what that means is you're going to learn all the notes on the 6th string here in the first position, then you'll learn the 5th string, 4th string, and all the way down to the 1st string, but you're just confining yourself to this group of 4 frets. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it may work better for some people, and that's kind of my philosophy here, is like, you really have to experiment with a bunch of different ways and figure out what works best for you, because the guitar has been around for hundreds of years. There's been a million different methods for learning and improving, and there really is no shortage of information. So it really comes down to your willingness to experiment and figure out what works best for you. So today, with my approach to learning the notes here, something I've thought about quite a bit over the years, hopefully this is providing a fresh perspective, a somewhat unique perspective on how to tackle this seemingly overwhelming task. But then again, there are millions of guitar teachers out there on YouTube. There's no shortage of information, so I'm sure I'm not the only one out there that's thinking this way. In fact, I can almost guarantee it. But that being said, let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at my favorite way to teach note locations on the fretboard. So the big difference between that traditional way that I just talked about and my way is I like to take more of a horizontal approach. So I consider this, if you go one position at a time and you just learn all the notes in those 4 frets on every string. See, that's kind of more of a vertical approach. You're going, top down or bottom up. Whereas the horizontal approach would just be remaining on a single string. So for example, let's go ahead and just quickly identify the notes of the 6th string. So remember, we're going horizontally here. So we'll always start with the open string. And if you know how to tune your guitar, you should know the note name of your open strings. All right, so we have E as our open string. First fret is going to be F. Then we have F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, and then we're back to E. So right there is a quick win for you in identifying your note names. On the single string, the 12th fret is always an octave of your open string. So remember, our open string starts on an E, and when we got to the 12th fret, we hit the note E again. So those notes are octaves. So what that tells you is you can just learn the first 12 frets, and then everything after that just repeats itself. So once you learn up to the 12th fret, you're good to go for the rest of the fretboard. So before we move on though, just a couple things about the musical alphabet. So first of all, the letter names are A through G, and that can be put on a repeated loop in either direction, meaning once you go from A all the way up to G and you keep going, it starts over again on A after G. And likewise, if you're going backwards, and when you hit A, it would start over on G as well. So it's that continuous loop of the notes or the letters A through G. Now you'll also notice that as I was counting up, I was saying sharps in between certain notes. So that a sharp basically just takes a note like this A at the 5th fret here. If we want to do an A sharp, when you add a sharp onto something, it just means move up 1 fret. Raise the pitch by 1 fret or 1/2 step. So A sharp would be at the 6th fret because A natural is at the 5th fret. But sharps are not the only way to identify the notes in between the natural notes. We also have something called a flat. So, and there's a lot that goes into this as far as like studying scales and music theory and stuff, like why you would use sharps instead of flats. But just to keep it simple here, I like to think of it as direction, the pitch direction. So like I said, a sharp raises the pitch. So from A at the 5th fret to A sharp at the 6th fret. So a sharp raises the pitch by that single fret, whereas a flat would lower the pitch by a single fret. So if we started here at the 7th fret, then this is the note B, B natural. And if we lowered it and went to B flat, we would be back at the 6th fret. So some of you might be thinking now that, wait a second, isn't the 6th fret A sharp? Like how can that be A sharp and B flat? Well, this is a concept called enharmonic tones. And that's the big fancy word for the day. But it basically just means that on paper, you know, an A sharp and a B flat are going to look totally different. But as far as your ears can tell, there is no difference. It's the same note. So that's what that big fancy word enharmonic means. So now let's start at the 12th fret and work our way back down to the open string. Only this time we're going to identify the notes as flats. So we have E, E flat, D, D flat, C, B, B flat, A flat, G, G flat, F, and then finally E for the open string. Now, one last thing about the musical alphabet that you probably noticed that time around is that there were a couple of notes that did not have flats in between it. And likewise, as we were counting up in the opposite direction, there were no sharps in between it. And those notes are E and F and B and C. So if you can just keep those two note pairings in mind as you move about the fretboard, it's going to make your life a little bit easier. Okay, so moving on now. Now we're going to get into the exciting part about this style of learning the notes on the fretboard, doing a single string one at a time. And this is the concept of identifying root notes. So we can do this with both scales and chords. So let's start off by looking at a chord here. So we're just going to look at this A major chord. Nice standard open chord shape. So knowing that this is an A major chord, just think of that letter A. that is the root note. So when it comes to chords or scales, the root note is typically the letter name that is associated with labeling that chord or scale. So if this is an A major chord, we know the root note is A. So now let's move to the sixth string and find that same note A. So what we're going to do first here is it might take you a while to actually memorize the locations. So at first you might have to just count up note for note. You know, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. So now that we have this A identified at the 5th fret, we can just make a major bar chord shape that goes across 6 strings. This is just a standard bar chord shape. So, I mean, don't worry if you don't know bar chords yet or if you're still struggling with them. This is more just showing you the concept of how you can learn the note names in a more musical context, which is always a lot more fun. You know, rather than just going up and memorizing, oh, this is the note A, we can associate that now with this A chord down here. And now we have 2 different ways of playing an A major chord. So let's say you're playing a song that uses this common chord transition here of an A minor chord to a C major chord. You know, a lot of songs use those 2 chords. It's a very pleasant chord change there. So something you can do then to reinforce your goal for learning the note locations on the fretboard is just to translate those notes into bar chords now. So like on the 6th string, we saw this A right here was on the 5th fret. And what we did before was an A major bar chord. Now to turn this into minor, all we have to do is lift off the 2nd finger here. There's that minor sound versus the major sound. Okay. And now the C, remember that was at the 8th fret. So we'd shift up the bar to the 8th fret here and put the 2nd finger back down for a major chord. And now we have our 2 chords, A minor to C major. So exact same chord transition there with slightly different sounds because we're using higher notes, higher pitches within our chords, and we're also using a different shape, which is going to rearrange the notes, the way those notes stack up within the chord. All right, so we could do the same thing now with scales. So think of that famous minor pentatonic box pattern that everybody knows and loves. So I started that at the 5th fret, which is the note A, which means this is an A minor pentatonic scale. So when it comes to scales and knowing what scale you need to be playing, or what key rather you need to be playing in, it does take a little more theory knowledge, but let's just say that you're there already. So let's say we're playing a nice bluesy sounding chord progression in the key of B. So we're going to start off with a B7 chord. To an E7, so this would be the 4 chord, and then to an F sharp 7, so this would be the 5 chord, back to that E, and then to the B. You know, that's just a quick example made up off the top of my head. That's not like the traditional 12-bar blues style progression. But those chords put together in that order do identify the key of B. And when you have all 7 chords like that nice bluesy sound, you can use that minor pentatonic box pattern to solo over that progression. So that's where identifying the note names comes into play. So, for example, from the last chord that we looked at, we know that A is at the 5th fret. So you see how this kind of compounds on itself. The more examples you use, you start to remember where notes are. And now we can identify the note A because that letter is very close to the note B in the alphabet. So it's kind of like a shortcut rather than starting from the open string and counting all the way up to the 7th fret to get to B. So, you know, little tricks like that, as you start to get the hang of this stuff, you're going to start to identify shortcuts. And more importantly, you are doing all of this within a musical context, which means you actually have a reason to explore the notes of the fretboard rather than just blindly trying to memorize all of them. So another way to think about it then is we already know that this note is A, and if you remember those natural half steps that we were talking about between E and F and B and C, if we're moving from A to B, that is not one of those note pairings, right? So we know that B should be 2 frets higher than A. So you see there's a ton of ways that you can go about thinking about this stuff. And really, it just comes down to, like I said, experimentation, figuring out what sort of mental shortcuts really stick with you. You know, don't spend a bunch of time trying to copy the exact way that I do things or any other guitar teacher on YouTube. You know, there's a lot of great information out there, but it's all pretty useless if it doesn't, like, stick with you. You know, you got to find the stuff that you relate to, and eventually you got to come to your own conclusions with this stuff. You know, kind of that mix and match. Like, so maybe this lesson that I'm teaching you now, you go watch another video of somebody else teaching you how to learn the note names, and they might teach it totally different. But that's going to give you the idea of saying, well, I can combine something that Adam said with something that this guy said, and come up with your own method for learning this stuff. And that's really the secret to faster progress. But not only faster progress, it's more enjoyable progress because you are, in fact, playing it your way, which is always more fun. All right, so before we end the lesson for today, let's take another look at just a nice quick win here with the note names. So we spent a lot of time on the 6th string, right? And the open string is E. Well, I bet if you thought about it for a second, you can think of another string that is also tuned to the note E, right? It's the 1st string. So since those notes, even though they're 2 octaves apart, since the notes are same, the letter is the same, all of the notes on the frets that we identified are also the same. So you still got E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A, and so on. And remember, always remember, when you get to the 12th fret, that is always going to be the octave of your open string. So the quick win here is once you learn your 6th string notes, you automatically know your 1st string notes because they're the exact same. So that's all I got for you today. Be sure to like and share this video if you found it helpful. And feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions. You know, just pop it in the comments down below, or let me know if you have any other interesting ways of memorizing notes on the fretboard. So I will see you next week, and until then, happy practicing, my friend.